First off, I'd like to say that my upcoming special, or should I say specials on moon rocks, are coming along nicely. That's right, my upcoming project is so huge I've had to chop it up into individual episodes just to cover everything. It should be out in December. In the meantime, Phil Webb has begun releasing videos discussing what he claims is off-topic material. His video is mostly nothing but poisoning the well and attempts to muddy the waters. But, seeing as he completely failed to provide evidence that independent parties tracked Apollo all the way to the moon and back, this should be fun. Casing, who never made any secret of his inside knowledge, explained that the astronauts were never aboard the capsule when it launched. Instead, they came back down the gantry elevator and remained on Earth in secrecy for the duration of their mission.
In this particular case, Casing's supposed inside knowledge came from the inside of his head. Peter Hyams borrowed this creative premise for his 1978 sci-fi movie Capricorn 1. In this fictional story about the first manned mission to Mars, a malfunction in the life support systems renders the spacecraft uninhabitable. Nevertheless, NASA decides to send the spacecraft to Mars unmanned and have the astronauts play out the mission on Earth. Casing spells out how this was supposedly done on Apollo, starting on page 64 of his whimsical book, We Never Went to the Moon.
However, we have also seen evidence that the Apollo's 10 and 11 crews were in Earth orbit for the duration of their missions, not on the Earth as the Apollo 15 crew were. Meaning, a slightly different method of fake telemetry had to be used.
Wait a minute. How could there be evidence that the Apollo 11 crew was in Earth orbit when the great Sensei Casing, who never made any secret of his inside knowledge, said that Armstrong and Aldrin were on a soundstage 90 miles north of Las Vegas when they were supposed to be making their historic first moonwalk?
The evidence for Apollo 10 and 11 staying in Earth orbit surfaced long after Casing's book was written. From what I understand, Casing was aware of the various proposals that those working on the Apollo simulation project had planned back in 1961, during his time at Rocketdyne, such as the plan to have the astronauts remain on Earth in secrecy and feed pre-recorded simulated data over the landlines to the guys at Houston, just as they had done during training. Casing was no doubt there during the planning stages, but he left Rocketdyne before the actual faking took place, and thus would not have known for sure which of the missions used this method and which ones didn't. The pages from Casing's book that Webb shows simply use Apollo 11 as an example in his step-by-step procedure explaining how the on-Earth scenario was pulled off based on the information he obtained during his time there. The evidence that indicates that Apollos 10 and 11 were in Earth orbit when they were supposed to be in cislunar space is evident in the videos from the mission. On both flights, although the crews are endlessly floating around in the cabin, there are significant moments when the hatch window is filled with a blue light, not the blackness of space. Propagandists have claimed that this is simply the sun's light being refracted through the window, but there is a problem. In both cases, the sun is not shining through that window. In the case of Apollo 10, the blue light was seen around 72 hours into the flight, when the astronauts were supposedly 9,000 miles away from the moon. During this time, the astronauts explicitly state that they have no view of the sun or the moon.
Right now we cannot see the moon even though it is rapidly accelerating towards it by its mass. Over.
Roger, we copy. We have you entering the lunar penumbra at this time. Do you notice the sun setting at all? Over.
We can't see the sun right now, Charlie.
Roger.
We're not in the right attitude to see it.
And on Apollo 11, the blue light is seen when they claim to be 130,000 miles away. We know that this can't be light from the sun. The sun was shining through window number 5 at the time.
Yeah, those are both the 2 star charts that he is using right now as sunshades over the right-hand window, window number 5. Roger, we see the sun shining in through it behind us.
And then there is the fact that the Apollo 10 telecasts were in fact pre-filmed and edited together, as is clearly obvious by the camera cutting left, right and centre despite running synchronised to uncut audio communications.
People over in that area, but probably seeing it in black and white.
After this information was posted on YouTube, Spacecraft Films tried to suppress it by using DMCA abuse, falsely claiming I infringed their copyright when in fact the material was public domain.
Nevertheless, why, do you suppose, would NASA risk sending Armstrong, their poster boy for the Apollo program, into space, then keep the later mission crews safely on the ground? Why would NASA risk changing their methods of deception halfway through the program? To ensure success of the hoax, they would have been more consistent in their approach. Why didn't they put all the astronauts in low Earth orbit? For that matter, after Apollo 11, why did they risk any additional missions at all? The only reason that the conspiracists give for NASA to perpetrate the hoax to begin with was to fulfill Kennedy's goal of landing a man on the moon before January 1st, 1970. Once the world saw Armstrong and Aldrin walk on the moon, Kennedy's goal was achieved, and there was no reason to continue the hoax, was there? Each additional mission was a liability, nothing more than another opportunity for someone to discover the Apollo program was a fraud. Why take that risk needlessly?
I can hardly be expected to know why NASA kept crews in Earth orbit on some missions and kept crews on the ground on other missions. But as for the second part of Webb's begging the question, I have answered this countless times on radio shows and even explained it in the frequently asked questions page on moonmovie.com. Yes, the stated goal of Apollo was to meet Kennedy's challenge of putting a man on the moon by the end of the decade. In the public's mind at least, that was completed with Apollo 11, but NASA couldn't simply call it quits then and there. Not when there was pressure from the scientific community for much more elaborate missions, like a base on the moon, visits to the far side of the moon, visits to the lunar polar region, manned missions to Mars by 1982, manned flybys around Venus. Many of these proposals were already on the drawing board at the time. NASA couldn't simply call it quits willy-nilly. They needed an excuse to cancel the program, and that excuse they got on Apollo 13.
Houston, we've had a problem. Had a BP bus undervolt.
The staged oxygen tank explosion resulted in the cancellation of the Apollo program, and all those elaborate plans for spaceflight were essentially flushed down the toilet. Oh sure, although Apollos 18, 19 and 20 were canned, they still had 14 to 17 to fake. But one way or another, NASA found ways to degrade or limit the amount of footage they would have to fake. Apollo 11 obviously had its black and white grainy TV pictures. Apollo 12's colour TV pictures were conveniently prevented when Al Bean destroyed the Videocon tube by pointing the camera directly into broad sunlight. On Apollo 13, they had a few in-flight broadcasts and then cancelled the rest for the sake of preserving power. Then on Apollo 14, when they did supposedly manage to get a colour TV camera to the surface, the landscape was overexposed. It was one story after another. And did I mention, on all these moon flights, the broadcasts that the world saw were kinescopes filmed off television monitors, which further degraded these already poor quality TV pictures.